Welcome to My Right Way podcast. There is no right way to write, but I'm here to share this author's process so I can help you find yours. Today is a very special day. It's finally time to reveal that I'm on the Creative Penn Podcast today, and we're talking all about Take Back Your Book, an author's guide to rights reversion and publishing on your terms. If you have no idea why this is so special to me, the Creative Penn Podcast is one of the top podcasts for writers at all levels. The host, Joanna Penn, is a pillar of the self-publishing community and a forward thinker for future technologies of writing and publishing. So, if you're not already listening to her, be sure to subscribe to her podcast right after listening to this one. I'm bringing you behind the curtain of this process while also giving you practical tips on how you can research, pitch, and appear on podcasts. My hope is to inspire you to reach out to other podcasts who you admire, to bring more people into your author network, and to reach readers you might not have been able to on your own. I'm going to split this conversation into different sections covering how to find podcasts to pitch, how to pitch yourself to a podcast, how to prepare for the podcast interview, how and why you should share the podcast episode after it goes live, along with my amazing experience in speaking with Joanna Penn. Also, as a caveat, these tips could work if you're interested in reaching out to YouTubers or other influencers as well. So let's jump in. How to research podcasts. In case you didn't know, Take Back Your Book is my debut nonfiction book for writers that I released in 2021. It's a part memoir, part self-help book about rights reversion from a traditional publisher and how you can get your rights back to make money on your book for potentially the rest of your life and beyond. This is a very niche topic in the publishing industry, but as I was researching to write this book, I found so many authors who had been through this process, but without much support. I knew this was a special topic that authors could relate to and possibly not feel so alone. But I wanted to create the opportunity to bring it to more authors, which is why I reached out to podcasters to help find that audience. It helps to understand that special, unique thing about your book or your spin on that topic, or even having that unique perspective that helps make you stand out. Most successful podcasters bring new and fresh content to their listeners since no one wants to hear the same thing repeatedly. Once you have your perspective, it's time to do the research. This could come in the form of looking at the podcasts you already listen to. I've been a listener of the Creative Penn for years. No ways did I ever think I would have the honor of being on it, but I put it on my list anyway. Then I looked at podcasts adjacent, which basically means what are similar podcasts in that space? What do people that listen to the podcast you love, who else are they listening to? Add those to your list. During this part of the process, dream big. Because if you have a topic that you're passionate about and want to share with the world, then your excitement will definitely show. And it will be entertaining and educational for your target audience. After you have your list, it's time to dig deeper. I would suggest taking each of those shows and look at their back catalog of episodes. Has this topic been covered before? If not, great, you have an advantage. If it has been covered before, don't be discouraged. Think about that unique perspective. Do you have that? Is there a new spin that you can bring to that subject that hasn't been covered yet on that podcast? With the Creative Penn, I checked out Joanna's massive backlog of episodes, and I didn't find one topic about rights reversion. Now, that didn't mean she's never talked about it on her show during interviews, but there wasn't a dedicated episode. So that was the main part of my pitch. Most of the time, you can look at podcasters' websites and sift through their previous episode topics. Then look at their FAQ page, because most of them have them, or contact page, and see what the process is like to pitch. And more importantly, if they're taking pitches at all. One of the worst things you can do is make a bad first impression by pitching podcasts when they aren't accepting new interviewees. This research is essential for pitching. It shows that you were invested enough to do your research and to benefit their audience, not just yourself. Podcasters get pitched a lot, and you want to be the one who stands out from the rest. So now that you have a well-researched list, let's talk about pitching. How to pitch yourself. On that FAQ or contact page on their website, you want to note how this podcaster prefers to be contacted. Do they prefer an email, a form, DMs, etc. This is a very simple but very important matter of following instructions, and it will do wonders for you. If they want you to fill out a specific form, do it. Don't email them, don't DM them. Most of the time, they have their own way of organizing their data from potential guests. Going around it to try to get in front of them will possibly put you in their junk email or deleted. If they ask for that specific format, or they have specific questions in their pitch form or email, answer them. If they don't have any specifics, you need to gear your pitch to them in their audience. Now, it's always nice to start off with the correct spelling of their name, showing that you're not a bot or someone pitching to a BCC list because it's easier. Please don't do this. People can spot it a mile away when you're being disingenuous or you say, "To whom this may concern." Just don't do it. Do a little bit of research and I guarantee it'll help you a lot. I'm always of the mindset, work smarter, not harder. So before I started pitching anyone, I created a template of sorts listing who I am, my credentials, and information about that book, because that doesn't really change from pitch to pitch. However, I reserve the opening paragraph to explain my interest in that specific podcast. And in that opening message, you could mention a recent episode that you enjoyed or a mutual friend you have in common. Try to find some commonality there. It doesn't have to be long. A sentence or two will suffice, but it will definitely help bring you out of that pile of people who are just mass pitching these podcasters. Then dive into the meat of the pitch. Who are you? What are you pitching? Is it a book? Is it a service? Is it a course? And how will this information benefit their podcast and listeners? It's really simple. Being honest and sincere will usually be all you need. So once you've sent that off, then you have to wait. I know, waiting stinks. But if you're an author, you know there are a lot of parts of the writing and publishing process that you have to wait on. But one of these days, you'll get someone who wants you on their podcast, and then it's time to prepare. So, how do you prepare for a podcast? First of all, I like to look at the information being conveyed during the podcast. Do they give you questions ahead of time or topics? If not, there's no harm in asking when you are scheduling with them about specific topics to prepare ahead of time so you can give the most to their audience. I'm sure they will appreciate this, and it also shows your professionalism. Also, you could listen to previous episodes of their podcast. Most podcasts usually have structure. If there are common questions that they ask every guest, make sure you have your answer prepared. Also, just in general, common questions during interviews will usually be about your expertise and whatever you're promoting, your book or service, and make sure you know your material inside and out for any question that may come up. When it comes to equipment, make sure you have what they need. If they meet over Zoom, make sure you have it downloaded and you're signed in ahead of time so there's no issues that day. Whenever I have these types of interviews, I usually wrangle my husband and we practice a test for picture and sound depending on the podcast requirement. Now, when it comes to sound, make sure you have a quiet space and a good mic. If you use AirPods or a headset, make sure that if you have longer hair, it's away from the mic so you don't hear it scratching against it. I also wouldn't recommend wearing jewelry if you could help it, especially rings if they clink together, or again, necklaces if they bump against the microphone. Speaking with Joanna Penn was such a pleasure. We met over Zoom, audio only, which definitely worked for me. We chatted a minute or so before the episode started. And she was also one to send me questions ahead of time. So I prepared those questions. I went over them a bunch of times beforehand, and I really felt prepared enough from the questions that she had sent. But what was special about this is that we sort of went off script with those questions as we were speaking to each other, just based on questions that came up or information that we were talking about. In that way, the conversation was more organic than if she were only asking me these questions, which was great. So I would say prepare yourself as much as possible, but also be yourself and be a little bit adaptable if you can. Whatever you are promoting, a book, course, coaching, etc., you created this thing and put it out in the world. So be sure to carve out your own space and own it. So once you've done the podcast, how do you share the episode when it comes out? Because it's definitely going to be something that will help promote you and the podcast that you love. As I said before, your main pitching point is what you can do for the listeners of this podcast and the podcaster. So when the interview goes live, you should help promote it as much as you're able. You're effectively growing your credentials for your product or service while supporting someone who took hours of their time preparing, interviewing, and producing this podcast, and potentially bringing them new listeners. It's a cross-promotion opportunity that benefits everyone. Several weeks ago, I watched MK Williams on YouTube talk about her experience on the Creative Penn podcast, and I thought it was the coolest idea to share it in that way, which inspired this episode. So share the episode of the podcast on your favorite platform, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, as if you were promoting your own achievements or book launch. If you can, schedule posts to go live over the next week or so after the podcast and beyond to continue to bring more people to the podcast episode. Being an author is so much more fun with the community, especially in the indie space. So I wanted to give a quick thank you to Joanna Penn and also the following podcasts that I've been on recently where I've talked about rights reversion and being an author. Those include the Rebel Author Podcast, Next Level Authors Podcast, and Activated Authors. I'll put all the episode links in the show notes, and I do hope you go over to listen to all of them right now to learn more about rights reversion and publishing on your terms. So happy listening. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review, and I'll see you soon.